is in crisis over the shocking and unexplained deaths of hundreds of millions of bees over the last 8 months. Now, this could impact all of the U.S. as bees.
A beekeeper in California opened his hive on a Tuesday morning and found nothing inside. Not dead bees, not sick bees, nothing. The frames were full of honey. The comb was perfect. The queen's cell was intact. But the colony, 60,000 bees that had been alive and working the day before, was gone. No bodies on the ground. No pile of dead workers at the entrance. Just an empty box in a field, like a house where everyone left in the middle of the night and never came back. He called 3 other beekeepers in his county. Same thing. Hives full of food. No bees. By the end of 2025, American beekeepers had lost over 60% of their colonies. Not in one state, across the entire country. 60% gone in a single year. And here's the part that should bother you even if you've never touched a beehive in your life. The thing that killed those bees isn't a disease. It isn't a mite. It isn't a predator. It's a chemical that was designed to protect the food on your plate. And it's still being sprayed on 127 million acres of American farmland right now. Today, while you're watching this, stay with me. Because the story of how a pesticide turned the food supply into a poison delivery system and how the entire country tried to save the wrong bees while the real ones went extinct is one of the strangest things happening in America right now. The chemical has a name most people can't pronounce: neonicotinoid. Farmers just call it neonic. It showed up in the 1990s and the pitch was beautiful. A new kind of pesticide that kills bugs but doesn't hurt birds or fish or mammals. Safer than anything that came before. Regulators approved it, farmers sprayed it, the industry scaled it up until it covered an area of American cropland larger than the entire state of California. There are 3 of them: imidacloprid, clothianidin, thiamethoxam. 3 chemicals with names that sound like villains in a science fiction movie. They're used on corn, soybeans, cotton, wheat, sunflowers, fruit trees. They're coated directly onto seeds before planting, so the poison is inside the crop before it even breaks through the soil. And they're used on roughly 80% of the corn planted in the United States. 80%. Before a single bee visits a single flower, the chemical is already there waiting. But there was a catch nobody mentioned. Old pesticides sit on the outside of a plant. Rain washes them off. Sun breaks them down. They fade. Neonics don't work like that. They go inside the plant, into the roots, the stems, the leaves, the flowers, the pollen. Every part of the plant becomes the pesticide. You can't wash it off because it's not on the surface. It is the plant. Imagine soaking a sponge in poison and then squeezing it into a glass of water. You can't pull the poison back out. The water is the poison now. That's what a neonic does to a flower. So when a bee lands on a treated flower, it's not landing on a plant that got sprayed. It's landing on a plant that turned into the poison. The nectar is toxic. The pollen is toxic. The little drops of dew on the leaves in the morning, toxic. The bee loads up, flies home, feeds the pollen to the babies, feeds it to the queen, and the entire colony eats a tiny dose of nerve poison every single day for months. And here's what that tiny dose actually does. Studies found that at levels the EPA called safe, neonics cut sperm count in male bees by 39%. They scramble the navigation system. Bees fly out to find food and literally can't find their way home. They weaken the immune system so badly that parasites the colony used to shake off suddenly start winning. The queen lays fewer eggs. The workers bring back less food. And none of it looks like an emergency from the outside. It just looks like a hive that's getting a little quieter every week. They don't die right away. That's the trick. If they drop dead on the flower, someone would notice. Instead, the colony shrinks so gradually that the beekeeper doesn't see it until he opens the hive one morning and finds it empty. 60,000 bees, gone overnight. No bodies, no explanation. Just silence where the buzzing used to be. That's what colony collapse disorder actually is. Not a mystery. A slow poisoning so quiet that nobody sees it happening until the bees are already gone. And here's where this story takes a turn that should make you angry. The European Union looked at the same science, ran the same tests, and in 2018 banned all 3 neonics, imidacloprid, clothianidin, and thiamethoxam, for all outdoor use. Done. Over. The science was clear enough for an entire continent to act on. The United States hasn't banned a single one. 3.5 million pounds are still being sprayed every year, and every pound that hits the soil stays there for months, sometimes years. Neonics are water-soluble. They leach into groundwater. They show up in wildflowers growing in ditches miles from the nearest farm. They've been found in the pollen of untreated trees growing next to treated fields. Bees that have never been anywhere near a crop are eating poison that traveled through the water table, came up through the roots of a wildflower on the side of a highway, and ended up in the nectar. Nobody sprayed that flower. It just grew in the wrong dirt. But the bees dying in commercial hives aren't even the ones we should be crying about. Because while the chemical industry was poisoning the flowers and the Save the Bees movement was building rooftop hives, something much worse was happening to the bees nobody was watching. You've heard the phrase 100 times, save the bees, and people tried. They built backyard hives, cities made laws encouraging rooftop beekeeping, companies put little bee logos on their products. It became a movement, and it worked. America now has 3.8 million managed honeybee colonies, 25% more than 5 years ago. One problem: honeybees aren't wild animals, they're livestock. They were imported from Europe centuries ago. They live in boxes built by humans. They're fed sugar water when the flowers run out. It's like hearing that songbirds are vanishing from the forests and responding by building more chicken farms. The chicken farms are full, the feedlots are booming, and the forests are still going silent because nobody was paying attention to the birds that couldn't be farmed. America has 4,000 native bee species that were here long before any European ship arrived. Most people have never knowingly seen one. They don't look like what you picture when someone says bee. Many of them live alone. They dig tiny holes in bare dirt. Some are smaller than a grain of rice. They don't make honey. They don't sting unless you squeeze them. And they've been pollinating this continent for millions of years without a single human helping them. The American bumblebee used to be the most common bumblebee in the country. In 20 years, 90% are gone. Disappeared from 8 states completely. Franklin's bumblebee hasn't been seen alive since 2006. 20 years. Not one sighting. Almost certainly extinct. Nobody said it out loud. Nobody held a funeral. It just stopped existing and the world kept spraying. And here's why that matters to you, even if you've never cared about a bumblebee. There are crops that only bumblebees can pollinate: tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, blueberries. These plants need the bee to grab the flower and vibrate its whole body at a specific frequency until the pollen shakes loose. Honeybees can't do it. Their bodies don't vibrate that way. When bumblebees vanish from a region, those crop yields drop, and nothing we can truck in replaces what was lost. Speaking of trucking, this is the part of the story that should terrify anyone who eats food. Every February, 2 million honeybee hives, 88% of every commercial colony in the United States, get loaded onto flatbed trucks and driven across the country to California's Central Valley. The almond orchards. 80% of the world's almonds come from this one valley. 3 weeks of blooming. No bees, no almonds, no $7 billion industry. And almond growers pay for it. $200 per hive, 2 million hives. That's over $500 million spent every single year just to rent bees for 3 weeks. $500 million for a service that wild pollinators used to provide for free. 2 million hives stacked on pallets and hauled through the desert, unloaded in orchards sprayed with chemicals all year. The bees pollinate the almonds, then they get loaded back up and shipped to Washington for apples, Maine for blueberries, Florida for citrus. Same colonies, different pesticides at every stop, different diseases in every orchard. Bees that started the year healthy pick up infections in California, carry them to Washington, spread them in Maine, and bring them back home to die. That's not agriculture. That's a mobile infection factory running on borrowed time. And it's the only system we have because the wild bees that used to do this job for free are mostly gone. Killed by the same chemicals that are still being sprayed on the fields the trucked-in bees are sent to pollinate. Read that again. We killed the free pollinators with pesticides. So now we pay $500 million a year to truck commercial pollinators to fields that are still being sprayed with the same pesticides that killed the free ones. And the commercial ones are dying too. 60% losses in a single year, and we're still spraying. 1 in every 3 bites of food you eat exists because a pollinator visited a flower. That's not a slogan, that's a measurement. Apples, almonds, avocados, blueberries, cherries, cucumbers, watermelons, coffee. Take the pollinators away, and those plants stop reproducing. The shelves get emptier, not all at once, but steadily, season after season, in a pattern that looks exactly like what the bees have been going through for 20 years. The European Union looked at the evidence and banned the chemicals. The United States looked at the same evidence and kept spraying. 3.5 million pounds, 127 million acres, 60% hive losses, 90% decline in native bumblebees, a species not seen alive in 20 years, and a $100 billion food system held together by flatbed trucks and sugar water. They're not showing up anymore, and we're still spraying.